Welcome to video 5 in chapter 2, a review of chemistry. Our next couple videos, we're going to be talking about the biomolecules that make up your body. So there are 4 main categories: carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. Carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins we're going to go over in depth, but we'll save nucleic acids and talk about them more in depth in chapter 3. So this first video is going to be on carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are typically made out of 3 different elements in a pretty specific ratio, but there's always exceptions. So the first one is carbon, then hydrogen, and oxygen. And I'm going to use an X for however many carbons we have, a 2X for hydrogen, and an X for oxygen. So this is a typical ratio, so 1 to 2 to 1 for carbohydrates. But again, there's always exceptions. Now, for all of these biomolecules, we have building blocks that make them up. The building block of a carbohydrate is called a saccharide. And it has a very specific structure. Some of them are rings, some of them are going to be chains. We don't have to worry about that too much, but know that some carbohydrates are simply just one saccharide, and those are called monosaccharides, with mono meaning one. We also have disaccharides. So if we take 2 of these building blocks and put them together, we end up with a little bit more of a complex carbohydrate. And if there's more than 2, we kind of lump them together and call them polysaccharides. So these are different categories. And we'll go over some examples of these here in a bit, because we have very common ones that we already know that are monosaccharides, some that are di and some that are poly. But their general functions are pretty much what lumps them together. So one of the main functions of carbohydrates for our body is for energy. So we know that sugars provide energy, and all carbohydrates, or all sugars, are going to be carbohydrates. So this energy, we know that glucose is our body's form of energy. That is our fuel for our engines to work. But there are other forms also. Some disaccharides like sucrose, which we can break down and turn into glucose so we can use it. Another way that we use these are for structure. Plants use carbohydrates, polysaccharides in particular, for structure. And we also use these for energy storage. So animals typically use glycogen as an energy storage site for glucose. So our livers are actually able to take glucose and make a polysaccharide from that called glycogen that basically allows us to store more energy in a more efficient way. Plants use starch. So if a corn plant is going to make glucose through photosynthesis and it wants to store it, it will convert that glucose into starch, which basically condenses it a little bit and allows it to store it. And we use that. So corn that's picked for a while, that glucose that is formed by the corn plant when it's picked, eventually would be converted into starch. Examples, other than glycogen and starch, we have cellulose. Cellulose is a polysaccharide. It makes up the cell walls of plants. So when you're eating celery and it crunches, you're breaking apart that cellulose. But we cannot digest cellulose. It goes right through us. So fiber, what we call fiber in our diets, there's a lot of cellulose there. It basically comes out the same as it went in. Glucose is a monosaccharide. Fructose, which is commonly known as fruit sugar, is also a monosaccharide. Sucrose is another example. Sucrose is table sugar. That is a disaccharide. So whenever we eat sucrose, our bodies break the disaccharide in the two monosaccharides. That way we can use it. So a lot of these carbohydrates are broken down or altered to form glucose because that is the fuel of our body. So we can convert fructose into glucose with enzymes in our body. Another one is called chitin. Chitin is a polysaccharide, and it makes up the exoskeletons of a lot of insects, echinoderms, arachnids. Our bodies can't digest that either. So if you go to eat lobster, you don't eat the shell. We can't digest that. It's pretty hard too. So that's, in a nutshell, carbohydrates. The big thing here: energy, structure, energy storage, saccharides.